Recently, the AGBU held a book reading event with Adrienne Alexanian, who presented her edited work of her father Yervant Alexanian's memoirs called Forced into Genocide. This book is an addition to the series of books that have been published in different countries by the children and grandchildren of survivors of the genocide, based on the memoirs of their parents. Adrienne found her father's memoirs after his death and has spent years translating, editing, and preparing this manuscript, which includes rare documents, photographs, and one-of-a-kind insider's accounts of his journey as an Armenian soldier in the Turkish Ottoman Army during World War I. The book reading event began with welcoming remarks by AGBU's managing director, Anita Ansarian, who spoke about Adrienne Alexanian's years of volunteering and giving back to the Armenian community, including her time as an NGO representative at the UN for both the Armenian Diocese and the AGBU. And for her decades of volunteer work and philanthropy, Adrienne received the 2010 Ellis Island Award. With a slideshow presentation and readings from sections of the book, Adrienne summarized the book's content, which depicts her father's childhood and the life in Sivas up until 1915.
This is a little background of how life was before the genocide, and why Armenians never saw it coming. It's important to remember, my father says, that before the deportations, we Armenians were very much involved, not only with athletic competitions or scouting movements, but also with celebrations in Sivas. It always gave me great joy to participate in the performances of these different bands during the holidays, and to hear them play their music so proudly outside of the government buildings. Before 1914, Armenians were very much part of the fabric of Sivas, and nobody would have believed that they could be annihilated so quickly, so unceremoniously. Nobody would anticipate what was to befall us. Even those who had survived the many pogroms and massacres, such as the Hamidian massacres that preceded the genocide of 1915. And as we know, after the Hamidian massacre of 1895 was the massacre in Adana in 1909. Armenian and Christian school organizations and groups in Sivas were not preaching separatism or advocating revolution. They were, in fact, doing their best to preach loyalty to the government and to raise a generation that remained loyal to the Ottoman court. Even though in July of that year, World War I had broken out and Turkey had immediately declared war on the side of Germany, life was regaining a sense of normalcy. The general belief was that the war would last no more than 5 or 6 months, at most. I remember how we, the pupils, were encouraged to contribute to the national war effort with cash and linen to be sent to the front. My father worked part-time in a variety store owned by Giragos Hajinlian. One day, while his boss was out on an errand, a Turkish soldier came into the store looking for a watch chain. Now, this is a foreshadowing of events to come. The soldier was taking his time, so my father said, "After a while, I finally dared open my mouth. 'Sir, have you found a chain you like?' 'What's your rush, you son of a dog?' he roared, his hand hovering ominously above the pistol at his hip. 'Don't you forget, you're nothing but a gavur, and you're speaking to a Muslim. I could finish you off right now, and nobody would give a damn.' Then he glanced at the people in the store who had been patiently waiting for service, and now looked terrified. He seemed to hesitate. Then he looked into my eyes and whispered, 'You just wait a few days and see what happens. Some of our boys will be going to Tokat to deal with your people there. They'll be back in a day or two, and then it'll be your turn.'"
Adrienne also read excerpts from the memoirs that describe the circumstances of her father becoming a soldier in a Turkish army, while his entire family, including his beloved mother, walked the death marches and perished.
My father was arrested by the gendarmes, taken to jail, released, and ordered to return the next day. Mehmet Efendi told me to go home and return the following day without fail. This news shocked my mother, as we already knew we would be deported. There was no way to avoid the order. I now had 2 choices. I could either accompany my family on the road to the Syrian desert, or I could remain in Sivas and serve under the banner of the country that was condemning them to death. I have never had to make such a difficult decision. That evening, we all gathered at the home of my uncle Serope. There were many opinions expressed and much advice given to me as to what I should do. But my mother had the final word. Son, some of our family is in America. The rest of us are going to be forced to leave. God knows where we will end up. I've had ominous premonitions regarding our fate. It would be good if at least one of us stayed here. If something happens to us, at least you will still be alive. In any case, God will provide. That's what I did. I stayed. But the reality is my father didn't have a choice, because when he told his commander that he was going on the death march, well, he didn't call it the death march, but the relocation with his family, the commander said, you can go, but the soldiers will pick you up on the way and bring you back. You don't have a choice.
No matter how much we think we know about the details of the Armenian genocide, the history of every individual genocide survivor reveals new facts. The same is the case with this book. The audience learned many new and revealing facts about the darkest days of our Armenian history through Adrienne's presentation.
But an order came from the top that the Armenian soldiers had 24 hours to decide whether to convert or to face death. All of the Armenian soldiers agreed to convert, except for 4. My father was one of them. Conversion wasn't a religious ceremony and just a paper stating the change of religion and being given a Turkish name. My father was the spokesman of the 4 who strongly refused to convert and said that he was prepared to die. As you saw in the picture, was sent to Para Harbi Military Academy. He was sent there with 3 other Armenian soldiers, and this is an experience he had when he was on his way. The caravan guide, who was Turkish, showed us the mouth of a deep cavern where he said many Armenians had been dumped and eventually killed. The cavern had then been sealed with a large boulder and some dirt. The travelers, mortified, looked on this in horror. The caravan driver asked why everyone was so upset. After all, they were just Armenians. He told the story with such a perverted sort of pride and relish that my companions had to restrain me from jumping on the man. I couldn't control myself and wanted to attack him. That may well have been my own mother's resting place. During my service in the army, I encountered Enver Pasha, the Minister of War, a total of 3 times. I met him first when he went through Savaz on his way to the Russian front. I was working at Hajinlian's store at the time, and I saw him walk right down the road. While at the front, he was wounded. He was carried away to safety from the battlefield by an Armenian lieutenant named Yervant Alexanian. As a reward, this man's entire family was deported and perished. The second time I saw Enver was at the military workshop in Savaz on an inspection tour, after which the erstwhile Erzincan sewing unit was transferred to Savaz, as Erzincan was already in Russian hands. I met Enver for the 3rd time in Meliman, near Smyrna, where I was in charge of the officers' mess. This time he came in the company of Lehman von Sanders and other renowned officers. I was told that they would have a meal with our division, and at the time I was responsible for the officers' mess. Oh, how I was anxious to serve them a good meal, perhaps their last one. When I realized I would come into close contact with their food, I thought of poisoning the meal, and I almost put that plan into motion, but...
At the end of her presentation, Adrienne invited AGBU Director of Education Artun Hamalyan to read her father's final thoughts about his mother, which was a journal entry he wrote on Mother's Day, 38 years after she was killed in the Armenian genocide.
And I would like to read this paragraph that he has written on November 21, 1934. And you would think it has been written just today. It says, all those who were born as Armenians, raised and educated as Armenians, simply call themselves friends of Armenia. We are not friends of Armenia. We are sons of Armenia. The statement encapsulates both our rights and our responsibilities. This is why we have been trying so hard to launch large-scale reconstruction efforts in the town in Armenia that bears the name of our beloved Sivas. The Armenian diaspora must do this, must invest in Armenia. After all, at least we will then have the knowledge that those few Armenians who have found shelter in their own homeland will be living a decent life with their lives, rights, and properties protected. This is the first duty of diasporan Armenians. Their second duty is to keep the torch of their Armenian identities burning and to advocate for their homeland and their people in their countries of adoption, to keep our nation alive. To survive as Armenians, we must always be aware of our responsibilities. And this is written on November 21, 1934.
The audience was very moved, which led to an interesting portion of the Q&A. We later sat down with Adrienne and learned interesting facts about her father's life after his survival of the genocide and his new life in the United States.
Adrienne, thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's my pleasure.
Please tell us, what is this book about and what inspired you to publish it?
Well, this book is about my father's experiences as a conscript in the Ottoman Turkish Army. It's the only book of its kind in Armenian literature, so it was very important that his story be told and that this book be published for the bigger audience, not just the Armenian audience, but for the American audience, the European audience, and the world.
How did you find these memoirs and the photographs?
Well, that's an interesting story. They say that life is what happens when you're making plans, and my only plan was to clean out a closet, to go through my father's papers, and to donate them to the various organizations with which he was affiliated. My father was president of the Bronx chapter of the fundraising committee that built St. Vartan Cathedral. He was chairman of the Bronx chapter of the AGBU and a delegate to their conventions. He was president of the New York chapter of Pan Sepastia Union, and he was also co-commander of the Vaspuragan Lodge of the Knights of Vartan. So my only objective was to go through the papers and archive them. And then at the bottom, I found all of these booklets and these individual papers and these documents in Ottoman Turkish and in Armenian, and pictures, all of which were one of a kind. So I spent over 50 hours with an Armenian teacher. She read them to me. I took extensive notes, and I realized how important these papers were and what I had to do with them.
And what a treasure you found. Did you learn anything new when you read these memoirs compared to what stories you heard growing up?
Well, my father didn't really discuss the genocide and his experiences too much. He did say that his life was saved a couple of times, that he was supposed to be in front of a firing squad. But he didn't go into detail because I think he didn't want to traumatize me as a child. And, you know, life wasn't that easy for us growing up, so he didn't want to add to that. But when I went through his memoir, I realized the details of the experiences that he had had and how traumatic they were. And he had a phenomenal memory. The book has so many names, places, dates, events in detail. So his recollection was excellent. And this is really something for the history. It is a history book. It's something that's very important for our story.
How did your father's experiences during the Armenian genocide impact his life in the United States?
Well, I would say very profoundly. My father was unable to save any members of his family. 51 of them perished, including his dear mother. And because he was unable to do that, I think he felt that it was his responsibility to help any Armenian who needed help. So my father was the go-to person in New York. So whenever an Armenian came from abroad, from across, they would find Eddie Alexanian. He would find them jobs, apartments, furniture. And he and my mother would even find them life partners so they could stay here. So he was in the matchmaking business on top of everything else. But he used to drop everything. And as a child, I didn't understand why he would drop his professional obligations or his business obligations or his social obligations and go running when a stranger, an Armenian, asked for help. And he didn't care where they came from, what their political affiliation was. he was there to help them.
That's very admirable.
Thank you.
In what ways do you think this book can serve as an inspiration for youth facing history and human rights?
Well, that's an important question. My father would humbly say that he was only the instrument to tell a bigger story, the story of the genocide. I think it's important for the youth to know our history, our background, how much our ancestors suffered to preserve our identity, our language, our culture, our ethnicity. And I think it's up to them to research this and to use it moving forward to keep our place in history, our place in the world.
Adrienne, thank you for bringing your father's story to life.
Thank you.
Please tell our audience, how can they obtain the book?
Well, they can get it, of course, from the AGBU bookstore. They can get it from the Armenian Diocese bookstore and a variety of Armenian bookstores. And it's being sold on Amazon as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.